Okay, so the next session for the day is a panel, Hum Honge or Honge Kamiyab, Learnings from Approaches to Scale in Other Sectors. We've essentially invited a few of our guests who will be joining us in the panel today from different sectors, and the idea is, the objective is to have a discussion around examples of scale and draw analogies from different models outside the space of sanitation. And of course, then draw examples and analogies from within sanitation. So we will be planning this panel in a coffee table discussion. We'll begin with the four panelists speaking with each other, and then of course we'll open it up for Q&A amongst the audience. Without further delay, I would invite our guests on the stage. We have Satya from Pradan, Vanessa joining us all the way from SNEHA Mumbai, Matthew from Magic Bus, and Deval from Dasra. You can find the bios on each of these panelists on the app, which you guys have been so diligently using. Any order. I'm going to sit on this side. Thank you all today for joining us. We would, since this panel has limited time, we'll straight away get into the discussion. I would like to start with Satya. Satya, would you like to just share experiences of Pradan in the growth of the agricultural programs, especially through the women collectives on the ground?
So, feeling a little nervous after this dangal, so very lively. I'd like to share about our works, which is mainly focused around areas, central and eastern plateau regions of India, covering states like Jharkhand, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, parts of West Bengal, parts of Rajasthan. So these are the areas which are hilly, undulating, forested, and high concentration of tribals. Let me also say that, Pradan has been for the last 35 years, we have been systematically recruiting people from universities, because we believe that, capable and caring people rather than material resources are important to bring about transformation, real transformation in the villages. And we also believe that, these kind of people must work in the villages. It has been a great challenge for all of us to retain these kind of people in remote blocks, especially bereft of any kinds of amenities. But then, what do they do in the villages? I would say that we place them in the villages, and they start engaging with the community, especially with the women. They organize them into self-help groups. The immediate context is basically around poverty, indebtedness, etc. So material deprivation. So the whole dialogue starts around that. And the savings and credit activities are introduced, because these actually then introduces an element of transaction, which actually then brings the women every week to transact among themselves. But then Pradan systematically build on a whole discourse around gender, helping the women to understand their existential realities and challenges, and understand that, complexities of caste, class, gender. And this actually then brings a lot of cohesion, and they discover a very different reason to come together beyond savings and credit. So there's a kind of a vision of coming together for the purpose of building a better society, a more just and equitable society, and kind of a better village, which is much more livable. So from that point of view, I think that, one of the major areas, you can find that, these are the areas where you have endemic poverty. So we gradually start helping them in making plan around livelihoods. Different kinds of livelihood programs are introduced then. one of the major things is that an overwhelmingly large number of people are involved in farming. And farming is really very fragile in these areas. These are monocropped areas. Paddy is the only crop, and this is completely dependent on rain. So how do you help the people to increase their productivity in paddy? So that's, and to attain year-round food security is something which continues to be a huge challenge for a large majority of people there. And then subsequently, how do you help people to really prosper? Getting into more diversification, more intensification of agriculture so that people start growing different kinds of crops. So whether it is for meeting their nutritional needs, pulses and oil seeds, better way of combating the climate changes, better way of earning income such as cash crops like vegetables, different kinds of fruits and vegetables, livestock. So this is something which is at the core of our interventions. I would also say that the whole initiative is then, once this initiative gets crystallized in the villages, we would also like to see that the community then takes charge of the development processes in the villages. So then one collective then forms another collective, nurtures another collective. They bring women, into their folds, become very large. And these programs then become, they spread within an area through ripple effects, through sharing of experiences. And at the same time, we systematically introduce technologies, build ecosystems, also invite market, invite investment from the government. I think another very important component of our intervention is helping the women to mainstream, whether it is leveraging credit, large-scale credit from the banks, or large-scale grants from the local bodies such as panchayats and different line departments. So that actually helps them to build different kinds of livelihood assets. So whether it is water and sanitation, whether it is water harvesting systems, whether it is lift irrigation, whether it is pumps and different kinds of agriculture implements, so on and so forth. So I stop here.
Thank you so much, Satya. We'll come back with some follow-up questions on this. It was good to get an insight on Pradan's model and, of course, the power of collectives that you rightly talked about. I quickly want to move the discussion and maybe get some inputs from Matthew. Matthew, I wanted to get a sense of what Magic Bus's experience has been with regards scale. Of course, considering the delivery of the model, which you could perhaps speak about through NGO partnerships.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on the panel. So for those that don't know Magic Bus, we're based in Bombay, and our vision, our mandate is to alleviate poverty, the grand vision of trying to achieve that. And in this sort of, in the early days and before we scale, we sort of understood two critical things. And one was that, you couldn't operate alone in this whole gamut. That if you're going to solve something as big as poverty or even sanitation, that you needed to bring in a number of inputs. And the second thing we realized it would take an awful long time. So we devised a program which was called Childhood, is called Childhood to Livelihood, where every child has to enrolls at the age of 12, and we keep them in our program all the way through to 18, where we try and deliver a livelihood to nearly 400,000 children at the moment. I think, we always started to talk about, when we initiated Magic Bus, we always talked about scale, but that meant many different things to many different people in the organization. I'm sure that is the case with you guys as well. I was talking in terms of systemic, national, nation building, and lots of people in my organization were talking about going from 3,000 to 5,000 to 10,000. So I think, this was a real, I think one of the things I'll keep coming back to in this very short 5-minute conversation is the impact it has on culture and leadership and the kind of products that you want to be excellent at. Magic Bus grew very fast, and this was propagated also by CSR. And one of the big challenges you have, is that, the money often comes very fast with CSR. If you are able to, and I know many of you are recipients of big grants, but what ends up happening is it's very dangerous in that you can get into strategic drift. You can go away from your mandate, and start doing things that you didn't really set out in your vision. In our case, it was alleviating poverty, but we were given mandates and a lot of money to deliver nutrition, to deliver gender programs, to deliver road safety programs by some companies. And the organization went into this mode of collecting this capital, and then started to overtrade. You know, things started to go quite difficult and started to sort of go pear-shaped. And so we had to have this really big, I guess, a regrouping of the organization about 3 years ago. We were delivering to 400 children. We had 100 different partners, and actually probably about 100 different outcomes with those partnerships. And one of the big pieces that we decided that we would do is to be quite sacrificial about what we wanted to do to be good at solving poverty. We came down to two things, which were life skills, which we're very good at, and livelihoods, which we're very good at. But you still need 6 other pieces in that journey out of poverty. Every child, you know, needs to have a number of different things happen, as they do in the sanitation value chain. And I think, you know, we understood pretty quickly that actually Magic Bus operating by itself in any one community is pretty impotent, and that we needed to go out and start creating these partnerships in the areas that we didn't want to operate in. So we started to create a very strong collaborative culture in the organization 2 years ago, which actually culminated in things like going out to grant partners like HDFC, where we received a grant for, I think, about 12 crores, and giving 6 crores away to an education organization because we knew we needed that piece in the inputs to enable us to get a child out of poverty. And collaboration is really tough. I founded ClearTrip. I used to run Cox and Kings in India. I'm not from this industry. I thought I'd been in a tough environment. This environment, I think, non-profits are extremely poor at collaboration. I think we really need to do some internal thinking about this. It requires a lot of letting go. It requires a lot of risk-taking. It requires a whole cultural almost re-engineering of our cultural mindsets in organizations, and given the context that we all operate in. And I'll just say the last 2 things, I know my time's out, about growth, and maybe this will come up in the discussion afterwards. You know, we've literally grown at 50% per annum over the last 10 years. And some of the conversations I'd like to have after this are on leadership, the impact on leadership, and how people view scale and growth and the kind of competencies you need. The second is the impact on culture, ensuring that you are still insurgent, you're not incumbent, your excitement, the entrepreneurialism is still in your organization. I'm sure all of you are absolutely terrified of process and bringing in systems and losing that passion that we all started our organizations for. And the final thing is about simplicity and strategy, is doing what you know you're good at, and then creating those ecosystems which you spoke so well about just now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for quickly summarizing leadership, culture, and simplicity with strategy. We'll come back to that in a moment, but I would like to pull Vanessa in the discussion. Vanessa, one of the important stakeholders for SNEHA's work in Bombay has been the government. And I would like you to briefly speak through the model of SNEHA to familiarize people with it, and of course also talk about, in the journey of growth, what is the inflection point when one realizes that scale means partnering with government and taking things forward?
Thanks, Anurag. So actually, before I talk about scale, I think one of the things that you precede scale is really creating an evidence-based model. So data collection analysis is in the DNA of SNEHA, and it's always been there. And I think that forms, it's only when you have an evidence-based model that you believe that you have something that is ready to scale. So thanks to Dasra, actually a couple of years ago, they supported a program of ours on child health and nutrition. And we had covered about 35,000 children across 2 to 3 areas on reduction of malnutrition. And we were able to create a model where we were able to reduce malnutrition by 28% and 33% respectively in 2 areas over 2 years, which was significant. We then believed we were ready now to scale this. But we also realized that this was an incredibly resource-intensive model, and we needed to transition this out to the government because we couldn't keep raising funds to create these islands of excellence. So we partnered with the government. We were always working with the government. We partnered with them much stronger, and we collaborated in actually designing the next phase of our program. We halved our resources, so our costs reduced significantly. We were able to increase the scale of our work, so our scale increased considerably. And we were still able to bring about significant change. Now, having said that, partnership with government is always difficult. I think it needs a bucket full of patience to start with. But at the core of it, we did believe that with adequate training, capacity building, appreciation, and engagement at every level of the government, we were able to see some amount of change. It's a reasonably good amount of change. It's probably not going to take 2 years, maybe it will take 5. But the thing is, it'll be much more sustainable. The second aspect is engaging community, and I think that's a lot like you did at Pradan, was actually make the community start taking responsibility for their own health. And that is difficult because health is very often, I guess, like sanitation and toilets, a little lower down on the priority. So engaging the community to make them take responsibility was the other important change that we made in bringing about this transition, which then allowed us to scale. So actually moving the responsibility to the government as well as the community, and we just being the catalyst in between. The second point to answer is the role of the government in terms of actual implementation. Our program on maternal and newborn health was set up, actually that was our flagship program, where we created a referral system for high-risk pregnancies to make sure that mothers delivered babies, high-risk mothers delivered babies that were healthy and of good weight. So we started this program in Mumbai, and we worked with about 35 health facilities at different levels across Mumbai. Once we were able to show that this referral system was actually creating impact, the next stage was we actually got invited by other municipal corporations to scale these up across municipal corporations. And today we work in 7 municipal corporations with the government. But I think some interesting learnings came out of this. The first is, of course, certainly it's far cheaper to work with the government than try and implement it yourself. It's far more sustainable. The learning that we have got, and which is fed back into our model. So most recently, we partnered with Save the Children to scale this maternal health model in Pune. And it took Pune just 1 year, the Pune Municipal Corporation, just 1 year to complete this model, and it took us about 5 years. So I think there is a lot of learning when you partner because the environments change, the people change, the partners change. So constantly, keeping an open mind to new partners and feeding that learning back into program implementation, I think is very important for scaling.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. We'll quickly move on to Devil. Devil, I wanted you to throw some insights on taking on the issue of scale from a slightly different point of view. What does it mean to internalize scale? What does it mean for an organization to understand how it should be growing from within to be able to grow from outside?
Yeah, no, I think at least at Dasra, we define scale in 4 different areas, and these have been covered already. One is, of course, transferring ownership to the community. I think that's critical, because if you can actually create something that the community owns and operates in the long run, it allows you to actually leave that community and do other things. I think depth is another big area of scale, going deeper in your programs. Breadth, of course, like Magic Bus going from 50 children when they started on a monthly basis to 400,000 children on a weekly basis today. And I think the 4th area that most people forget about is organizational sustainability. There was a group actually that just researched Ford Foundation's 300 odd grants and their grantee partners, and 30% of those grantee partners that the Ford Foundation supports has less than 1 month of resources, financial resources on their books. Therefore, if a funder actually was going to stop, 30% of Ford Foundation grantee partners would have to shut shop. This is an area that most people don't want to talk about. Financial solvency of a nonprofit, looking at your reserves, thinking about planning, thinking of the rainy day, sort of the rainy days. I think that's an area that most funders as well as nonprofits don't think about. And honestly, unfortunately, at times when you are working with such great partners like BMGF, you feel sort of shielded, that you can actually run and do whatever you want because you have that one donor that's with you from the long run, but that's probably not great for your model overall, and you need to think about other funders coming on board. I think another big area that people don't focus about when it comes to scale and in organizational sustainability especially is the leadership of that organization. We've been fortunate to work with many of you guys, if not all of you guys, over the last 2 years, but we see the same individuals coming from conference to conference versus a second in line, versus other people actually taking on that responsibility. And the second we're talking about, going from 5 towns to 5,000 towns, and all of you guys are going to be critical in that journey, you need to build stronger teams to take over certain aspects of what you do. This is extremely difficult at an organization level. I think Matthew touched upon it. From a leadership perspective, this means you probably need somebody who's very good in finance, so you need perhaps a new CFO or train your current CFO. This means you have to focus on maybe somebody else who looks at M&E. This means you may need somebody who looks at communication. So all of a sudden, small teams where founders did multiple jobs cannot exist anymore if you're looking at actually convincing the government or other stakeholders and partners to go from 5 towns to 5,000 towns. And so I think some of these aspects of leadership, of development, of organizational structure is always what most NGOs don't want to focus on. We think of it as a waste of time, a waste of money, it's boring, but I think without sort of these critical aspects, and again, the financial sort of diversification of your funding base, chances are what you will do will remain at 5, maybe go to 15 or 20 towns, but won't get to the 5,000 that we know is still a drop in the ocean, but hopefully is a model large enough then that then can be picked up by the Indian government.
Thank you, Deval. Transferring ownership to the community, depth, breadth from the program, and of course, organizational sustainability with effective leadership. This also resonates quite well with what Matthew has been speaking about, culture and the strategy. I quickly wanted to touch base on one aspect of scale, and I know that also is something that we've seen in Pradan's model and SNEHA's model, as well as with Magic Bus and implementation. When we talk about delivery of interventions across a value chain, such as for sanitation, we have something, likewise for livelihoods, for women empowerment. Clearly, when we talk about delivering programs through partnerships, through NGO partnerships, or delivering services through NGO partnerships, it's easier said than done. There are tons of challenges, and I would like you guys to maybe speak a little bit about some of the challenges that you may have faced in NGO to NGO, peer-to-peer partnership and delivery of programs. Absolutely, any failures that you would like to share would also be welcome.
So, yeah, I think we've had lots of challenges. So we actually had currently have about 5 partners that we work with. 5 very diverse partners partnering on, different aspects: maternal health, child health, prevention of violence against women and children. So, while all these 5 partnerships were all running parallelly, we were all tearing our hair out because, each partnership was coming up with its own new set of challenges. So we decided, let's get back to the drawing board. And we figured that our partners were probably tearing their hair out as well with us, right? So we said, let's do a stakeholder feedback. And we went to all the 5 partners, and including our own teams, and we took feedback. And we came out with some very interesting, we decided actually, lots of interesting outputs came of this study. And we said, we need to form a framework and certain criteria which are absolutely non-negotiable when it comes to partnerships. And I think 2 or 3 things came out very, very strongly. And the first is that both the organizations have to be aligned on vision, mission. And when I say vision, mission, I mean not just on paper, but really deeply in their implementation. So I'll give you an example. SNEHA being an actual implementing organization, for us, success is defined by actual improvement in the maternal and child health outcomes, which is, scientifically done with end-line evaluations, etc. Whereas we've had partners who've said, okay, you know, we've done these 5 activities, we've ticked these boxes, we're ready to move on to the next partnership. But we said, you know, you can't do that because that is a risk to the branding of our model and the brand of our organization. So I think those sort of challenges, you know, and it actually creates a lot of difficulties in working when you are not aligned on the same vision and mission. The second is in terms of resources. We sometimes underestimate, and when I say resources, I don't just mean money. I mean people, knowledge, motivation, you know, a whole host infrastructure. If that is not adequate to implement the program, and often, you know, partnerships are done, 2 or 3 people meet at a conference like this and say, hey, you know, you're doing this, I'm doing this, let's get together, let's try something. And we've done that, and we've realized that you can't do that. You have to spend at least 6 to 8 months, profile the partners across every single level to really understand them deeply before you sign on the dotted line. So I think these are some of the learnings that we've had.
Satya, would you like to add something?
I would say that inherently partnership is a hugely complicated mechanism to deliver programs. And one needs to be very clear about what are we going to achieve through partnership and where are the common grounds, the intersectionalities. Also, I would say that we have very limited experience of partnering on a one-to-one basis. So we are part of various NGO consortiums, partnership groups, where we can find that, you know, the learning is much faster. Rather than people viewing you as a mother NGO and we are other NGO, or you are an umbrella NGO, we are small NGO. So how do you develop that kind of an attitude of mutuality is something which is very important. Third one is also about when we start partnering with the vision of achieving scale. Again, I would say that what Deval also talked about is extremely important issue is about institutional capacities. So many a times you try to attain scale without attending to the organizational development and institutional capacity building elements. So that's something I thought that, you know, it's important.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I just want to add just one thing, because they've captured it so well. I just also think it's pertinent to say that I think, and very pragmatically, this is where the market is going as well. So increasingly when you're talking to seasoned donors, people who actually want to look at outcome impact, will look at sanitation and say, well, how come you're only doing one piece if there's 3 other pieces that need to happen if you're going to solve this? Or in poverty, why are those, who's going to deal with those? It's no good saying education's the most important thing if a girl gets married at 12 and there's no job at the end of it. So I would just like to add that increasingly when we go out and talk to people who have large amounts of capital, they're looking at the industries and saying, you know, in many ways forcing it from the top down in terms of making. Deval and Neera have written some amazing pieces on collective impact and how that impacts your ability to go out and market yourself.
Interesting. I mean, if I could summarize, you know, mission and vision alignment, availability of resources, institutional capacity, as well as collective impact. Deval, I have one last question for you before we open the floor for Q&A from the audience. Oftentimes, things don't go as planned. Oftentimes, things actually fail. You know, what are the worst things to happen to a partnership when we fail to scale, when you know, things aren't, or you know, partnerships isn't the best lever to actually go ahead and scale?
I mean, it's a cliche, but fail fast, I think, is critical. And I think to Vanessa's point then, it's really important to get the leadership of these organizations to participate in these decisions, not just sort of junior people. And I think that many times happens. At conferences, for example, leaders will meet and then they'll have the junior guys go in, and the junior guys honestly just don't have the expertise or the experience to figure out how much to give and how much to take. And what does success look like and what does failure look like? And so I think number one, it is really critical to be open and honest and saying, just like you do with any new program, that if it's not meeting certain indicators, that you should just get out. I think it's harder to do if you don't have a set of data that everyone is tracking. I think another big thing when it comes to scale, and I guess where we've seen organizations fail, is that they try to scale 8 different programs together at once. that is not possible. That doesn't mean what you guys are doing is not critical or important or needed in the community, but start with one, learn from that, figure out if it's even working, and then perhaps 2 to 3 years later, go to the next program versus doing everything at one time.
Thank you, Deval. Fail fast, that's the mantra for the discussion to move forward, and of course, doing too much too fast and all by yourself is not the best way to go. With that, I'm going to open the floor for questions from the audience. We have about 15 minutes for this discussion, so I would welcome you all to address your questions. Small request, please introduce yourself and the organization that you represent for the benefit of our panelists. And if your question is directed to an individual panelist, then you may just mention that. Yes, we have a hand over here.
Hi, I'm Kavita from Indian Institute for Human Settlements. I mean, this is building upon what Deval said about organizational capacity, and I think that's extremely important. And the question really to all panelists is that one is partnerships, but the other thing is, well, building a second line of leadership is easier said than done. And it's not the second line, it's just the entire team. And I think in the sanitation sector, there is an absolute crunch of capacity because it's not just a particular organization growing, it's like the sector is growing fast. So there is a problem overall, and it's not about which organization. So simple question is that, what are some of the lessons that you may have learned while scaling up about how do you build that capacity and how do you strengthen your organization and scale at the same time?
I mean, I wish we had an answer to that question, but I'll still invite the panelists to share their experiences, whatever they may be.
Sure. So I'll try and attempt to do just a few comments on that. And I think when you scale, invariably in a market like India and some of the issues we're dealing with, scale often outpaces talent. So when I increasingly talk to people, leaders of organizations, I wouldn't say rarely, but often money isn't the first thing they say is their challenge. It's the people, the talent that they're able to bring into their respective organizations. And this it scaffolds into a whole bunch of stuff around what David was talking about, institutional money, enough resources to hire those A-plus people that you need to run your organizations. And I think that's a very basic thing to look at in terms of, do they have the capacity to run and lead this organization? If they don't, for us, we had to replace 50% of our senior, in fact, I've had to replace 50% of our senior mid-team twice in the cycle of 19 years of running Magic Bus, because the people who were with me in those two phases either didn't have the capacity or the will to go where we wanted to go. And I think this pragmatism is really, you're running organizations that shouldn't be democratic. Consensus is important, but when as a leader, you know where you need to go. You need to make those tough calls on whether the team you have has the ability to go there. Give them the opportunity to align, and then if they don't, then they have to get off the bus, literally. So you end up, this drag happens a lot because you're trying to accommodate all those people that have been with you for so long and they're so passionate, but ultimately you need to get somewhere and get somewhere fast. Once you have that team, it's then about obviously the ability to then invest in those people, and it's very, very painful to keep having, like we have done, to keep having to recruit from outside. It costs a lot of money, there's a lot of risk, and takes a lot of time, and you lose a lot of time. So, getting that bunch of people, those winners in your organization, identifying them, and we have 2,000 staff at Magic Bus, and, we are very clear about who the top 25 people are every year, and we invest in those people, we want them to stay with us, and that's what I would say about second line leadership, is that, be brave, be bold. It doesn't matter if the other people don't get that same level of investment, you still need those capacities to grow and scale your organization.
Should we just take on, we'll take on more questions in the interest of time. Sanjay, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sanjay. While implementing an initiative, this is for all panelists or one or two, whoever chooses to answer, or while pursuing scale, did you ever run against the wall of a very dominant discourse which you had to overcome before actually going to the other side where the success lay? when you began implementing an initiative, or perhaps when you were trying to scale up an initiative, did you ever encounter a very dominant discourse which is against you, that no, what you're doing is wrong, or perhaps a better alternative already exists, or this is a better alternative? So do you ever come across that, another very dominant discourse which you had to overcome before you could actually achieve scale or achieve success?
So I was actually, before coming here, I was sharing with Vanessa. There is a huge and very dominant discourse which is currently being, in some ways, built around this National Rural Livelihood Mission. And you can see that they actually talk about one particular kind of model, which is fully focused on self-help groups around financial inclusion. So saving credit, financial inclusion, and there ends the story. They do not talk about livelihood, although you have National Rural Livelihood Mission, but livelihood piece is fully missing. The other part is also about that when you see that, these groups are promoted in large numbers like, assembly lines, and the whole intention of the government is basically to use these as instrumentality. There is a kind of a sense of instrumentality here. You can see that, these groups are actually being viewed as last mile delivery of all kinds of government programs, whether it is Swachh Bharat Mission, whether it is Prime Minister's Sinchai Yojana, whether it is for housing schemes, whether it is Ujjwala Yojana, everything you can find that, these are the groups which are actually used for planning, implementation, monitoring, etc., etc. And then you find that these are quickly getting co-opted by the government. On the contrary, we would like to see that the women come together for their own reason of daily struggles, daily tragedy. They have their existential realities, which is not fully, cannot be defined only through, financial poverty. So there are problems of domestic violence, there are problems of people's aspirations are not met. So there you can find that, there is a huge problem which we are all facing. Currently, I can tell you that, there is a kind of an alienation going on where the CSOs, the civil society organizations, are not allowed to work in the villages. They're saying that, okay, we are promoting the self-help groups. We are organizing the women. So you think about, something else. So that's where, it requires huge amount of mediating power to talk to the government, to convince the government that, okay, there are still spaces to discuss with the women, still spaces where you can build a different kind of discourse. And it's not easy. In many places, I can say that, the civil society organizations have been completely debased.
Do we have more questions in the room? Yes, please go ahead. Oh, yes, sorry. No, please, Vanessa, go ahead.
So actually, I wanted to just share an example of, we work on maternal child health and also domestic violence. So there was an organization that works on maternal and child health, and there was very high incidence of violence. So instead of reinventing the model, they asked us to come in and partner with them. And they typically work with community groups and pretty anti-government or anti-public, working with any public system. So one of the essential requirements when you're working on the issue of domestic violence is you have to have a good response system. So you have to work with the police, you have to work with the public hospitals, because that's where, women come in with burns and fractures and so on and so forth. So we kept trying to impress upon them the importance of engaging all these different response systems. And it was actually quite a make or break situation with them, because they were completely against working with the police. They thought they were corrupt and they didn't want to work with them. But it took a lot of negotiation to explain to them that you cannot compromise your model. If you truly believe that the response system is essential to that survivor of violence, then we cannot carry on a partnership without that response system in place. So a lot of negotiation happened, and finally, we told them, okay, you don't want to meet the police. Do you mind if we go and meet them? And we went and met the police. We did workshops with them, and we found them so incredibly responsive Then the NGO came forward and said, you know, that's fine, you know, we will now start working with the public system. So there are times when, you know, a partnership, so it's very comfortable for the partner to try and nest the partnership in the way that they usually operate. The minute your model or your intervention disrupts what they're doing, there's always some level of discomfort. But I think if you want to be true to what you want to do, then you have to figure out how to convince them.
Thank you, Vanessa. We have one more question at the end of the room. We'll take both the questions together, and then we can have the panel address it.
About this financial insolvency that you're talking about, have you taken into account all the new regulations that NGOs have come under? Both tax, there's a whole lot of complications, and the minute we start earning any revenue, we forfeit all our sort of, you know, tax exemption. There are number of new regulations. I don't know whether you've taken that into consideration. And then there was a time when the FCRA would actually question if you rotated your board or you rotated your leadership, it would be questioned. It would be seen as something that needs to be scrutinized and looked into. So.
Sure. Could we also have the question at the back, and then we can address them together?
I work for Center for Advocacy and Research. And my question is not directed to anybody, but you know, just I wanted to check, especially when we are working in the field of sanitation, it would help to learn from your insights how the daily challenges or the problem solving which we encounter when working with the community can be addressed without losing the overarching, you know, vision of scaling up. Because this is a challenge which we face at a daily level. There are so many concerns on the ground which keep coming, and we tend to either do this or that. So, you know, it becomes very difficult, so it will help to learn if any of you can share any experience which we can take back home.
Very quickly, can we have the responses? David, would you want to go first?
So I think on the first one, I think we definitely have antiquated laws for nonprofit organizations. I think that being said, there's also, at least what we've seen in our 18 years of existence, many times organizations themselves don't ask for institutional costs, don't ask for corpus. We settle with just program expenditures, and we're happy with that, not realizing that every single day in the field, we're creating behavioral change with communities, yet that same level of intent is not used when we're talking to donors. And so I do think, especially with the CSR law, there's a huge vacuum of knowledge and experience that exists with corporates who are now giving into this space, and it's up to us to educate them on the need to be institutionally sustainable and get more flexible grant funding, so you're not sort of commenting on one line item to the next, realizing that that's not how businesses operate and that's not how innovation actually occurs. So I think it's up to us to start having those conversations and not being afraid to say no to donors who don't actually fulfill the full cost of our product delivery if we're looking at impact at scale. And I think that's critical. I think in terms of the laws, and we've played somewhat of a role in speaking to other larger foundations, in fact, of seeing on how they can actually bring some of these issues to bear with the government, because it's also restrictive then in the impact that they are trying to create on the ground. And so, you know, the 15% rule, for example, the earned revenues, all of these things we're trying to see if donors can actually go forward, have these conversations with the government at both state and national levels, because we think they can be better advocates to change the nonprofit laws than perhaps nonprofits themselves.
Matthew, would you like to respond to the next question?
That was about how do we overcome challenges.
Yes.
And I'll probably say something really obvious here, so forgive me. But we don't allow paid staff to go into the communities at Magic Bus. So we insist that this is set up through mothers groups, through parents groups, through youth, and through children. And so, I mean, our view, and I apologize if it's too simplistic, but is to really, you know, provide enough information and capacity to the community, and for them, you know, for us, it's enabling that, empowering them to make those and solve those decisions. And I can't think of many times when they haven't come out with something probably better than we would have come out with.
All right, thank you so much. We're off on our time now, so I would like to conclude this session. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening to us, and hopefully some of these discussions will help you apply and imply with your day-to-day operations. I'm going to just take 1 moment of your time. I'm going to take the liberty of being the host of the panel, and would like you guys to summarize what scale means to you in about a word or a line before we close for day. So anyone would want to go first? Yes, go for it.
I think the paradox of growth is it creates complexity, and complexity will kill you.
I would say, to my understanding and conception, scale is definitely number, and no number is adequate number in India. So that's very important.
No, I think scale is something that you feel comfortable with because, everybody defines it differently. So eventually what works for your organization is what you need to define as scale.
I think India cannot survive without scale. I think it's time that as nonprofits we realize that, as government, et cetera, and if we want to achieve any of our sustainable development goals by 2030, it can only happen by scale, by partnership, by institutional building and leadership. And I think to a certain extent, we've been sort of left off the hook in terms of the accountability of scale and impact as a sector as a whole. And I think now as donors and others people are coming in, I think we owe it to the communities we're all here trying to serve to ensure that it happens, regardless of us saying it's difficult or complex or whatnot. And honestly, it's in your hands to make it happen. And I think we have confidence, at least at Dasra, that you guys will definitely do it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.